Hello everyone, and welcome to our post-reading discussion section on the Vita Nuova. This is a chance for us to focus on important sections of the text, for me to perhaps prompt you with some questions that will send you back into some further reading and hopefully bring further illumination and even more questions from you. So I've got 2 points of dramatic interest and 1 absence upon which I'd like to focus, and that the first is the frenzy of love into which the protagonist of this book is pitched. The second, that is the second point of drama, is the protagonist's decision to turn away from the woman who shows him pity after Beatrice's death. And the missing point at the center is the death of Beatrice itself. It happens, of course, we find out about it in the book, but it's not narrated with nearly the same detail that some of the other much less important events in the book. So that's my plan for this short segment on the Vita Nuova. We're interrupting our momentum in the Commedia, and you just have to trust me on this one. It's not an accident. There are things in this book that are going to bear directly on our readings in Canto 5, which comes next, and I will warn you that this is about the time that students really start to fall in love with Dante. That is, the events that they find him narrating in this little book, and then the consummate drama and portrayal of Paolo and Francesca in Canto 5. This is really the moment. There's no turning back. So after this, it's all or nothing for Dante. This is a strange little book. I think I've already referred to it that way. It's Dante's first work, but let's not even pretend that it seems to be on the same level as the Commedia. It feels older, it feels foreign in a way that the Commedia doesn't. And usually when that happens when we're reading, it's because there are certain conventions at work, rules of the game that we don't recognize anymore. If you want to look into some of the rules that govern a work like this, you'll want to look up the conventions of vision literature from the Middle Ages, and also of the courtly tradition or the courtly literary tradition. Those are both playing strongly here and making this book feel strange because it's so removed in time. Particularly strange about it, though, is, let's again be honest, the protagonist, who seems to be totally out of control. He is utterly consumed by his love for this woman whose glance he receives, whose greeting he pines for, and whose denial of that greeting just crushes him. And he feels this love in so many ways, and he describes it with so much weeping and gnashing of teeth and retreating to his room. He feels really like a paper boat lost on a giant ocean. Dante wants us to be immersed in this world of unpredictability and anxiety, and a love that takes control. And so I want you to, as you read, pay attention to those moments in which the protagonist, that's who we're going to call the narrator here, the protagonist finds ways to settle himself down. By the end, he will have found something in which to put his trust. And that something is going to be a bridge to the Commedia. So this is a work composed in what is called prosimetrum, which is simply a way of referring to a mixture of prose and metrum, or verse. The poems that are in this book are poems that Dante wrote over a period of some 10 years before he compiled them here and commented upon them. So there are 2 interesting momenta in this book. One is the kind of force of the lyric poems themselves, and another that you can begin to feel is the shaping force of the narrator as he puts them all under the same umbrella and gives them a direction. This book begins in a way similar to the Commedia, that is, by introducing a difference between an I now and an I then. So we have talked about the difference between the poet and the pilgrim. In fact, that is something with which Dante is experimenting right here in the Vita Nuova. In part 1, he says, "In that part of the book of my memory, before which there would be little to read, is found a chapter heading which says, 'Here begins the new life.'" It's my intention to copy into this little book the words that I find written under that heading. So what we're finding then is a distinction between the I who is writing now and the I who has experienced these things and wrote them then. In some ways, the I who is in the memory, and the life that Dante is looking back over, and the I who is transcribing those things. And we have to assume, just as with the Commedia, that the transcriber or the narrator knows more and is more enlightened than the one who is tossed and turned and whipped about by the circumstances and experiences in the book itself. So the first element of this book that I think we need to pay attention to is the frenzy into which the narrator is thrown when he encounters for the first time this woman who is named Beatrice, which means blessed in Italian. She was indeed a real woman named Beatrice Portinari. I will talk more about her and her background, but what we can say about this fictional narrative is that Dante encounters her first when they are young, falls in love with her, sees her again, she gives him a greeting, and throughout the early chapters of this book, he is absolutely overwhelmed and consumed by love for her. In the third chapter, he writes, "I was so overcome with ecstasy that I departed from everyone as if intoxicated. I returned to the loneliness of my room and began thinking of this most gracious lady. In my reverie, a sweet sleep seized me, and a marvelous vision appeared to me." So you can hear there the language of intoxication, ecstasy, reverie, sweetness. This is a man who has been overwhelmed by love. I think we can all sympathize with the kinds of unpredictable feelings and swings of emotion that love or that first love brings about in us. And it is damaging in terms of his ability to control himself, to think, to reason his way through it. This vision of love as something which overtakes, overcomes, and throws us out of our senses is a particular vision that was becoming popular at the time among Dante's circle, among writers before him, and it's a vision of love as something which comes and consumes us, that brings to us a kind of death, and that doesn't exist at the same time as reason. That is, reason and love can't coexist in the same place. Dante will have much more to say about that in the Commedia. I mentioned the missing point of drama at the middle of this book, that is the death of Beatrice. Dante, in a way, prepares himself for the death by narrating several other deaths, including Beatrice's father, and Beatrice herself dies in chapter number 28. I was still involved in composing this canzone, or song, and I had completed the above stanza when the God of justice called this most gracious one to glory. He says he'd like to discuss it more, but it's not proper to, and he moves on to discuss a bit about his weeping. He doesn't even give us any details about why or how her death happened. This is a glaring absence at the middle of the book, and it causes us to ask some important questions. So I want you to think psychologically about why it may be useful to have this gap or this absence where such an important and momentous event would otherwise have been. In some ways, as students often suggest, this is Dante's way of portraying how grief erases memory, how grief becomes a kind of traumatic event with which we cannot deal, and in some ways creates this gap that Dante then has to fill afterwards with a tribute to Beatrice. In chapter 35, Dante encounters a woman who takes pity upon him and who looks upon him kindly and offers him comfort in his grief. This is the second dramatic point. This is an important moment in the narrative because it seems entirely human for Dante to accept this comfort, to allow himself the compassion and the human feeling to grieve naturally over a loved one that he has lost and find ways to continue living in the world. But it is a dramatic turn of events that happens very shortly after this woman is introduced. He begins to suspect himself. In chapter 37, the sight of this lady brought me to the point that my eyes began to delight too much in seeing her, and I became angry with myself about it, and I felt very contemptible indeed. Dante, in fact, isn't interested in moving on from Beatrice. He's not interested in going back to living a normal life. And in fact, what he finds, at least in the framing of this narrative, is that he must turn away from another potential love, from someone who might replace Beatrice or bring to him the same feelings as Beatrice, because what he felt for Beatrice was singular. It was specific, and it pertained only to her. So while for us, this seems like a normal thing to do, love is in fact an emotion that is transferable. We can move it from one person to another, thank goodness, because otherwise we'd have a hard time getting into other relationships beyond our first love. But for Dante, there's something importantly specific and historical and irreplaceable about his love for Beatrice. He turns away from the potential comfort and dedicates himself instead to writing something that will do Beatrice honor and that will do justice to the way he feels about her. The final poem of the book is a fascinating preview of the Divine Comedy. It reads, "Beyond the sphere that makes the widest round passes a sigh which issues from my heart." That is, as I sigh, somehow this soul-like spirit ascends through the heavens, the spheres of the heavens, beyond the sphere that circles widest. This is a kind of preview of the Paradiso. It also links Beatrice with the heavenly spheres, and it allows us, I think, to see that Dante wants to make sense of his love, of the feelings that he has for Beatrice, in a way that goes beyond simply the love of a person for another, in a way that goes beyond simply what we think of as first love or of romantic love. The final moment that I want to stop and dwell upon briefly with you is the final section of the Vita Nuova, in which Dante resolves to say no more until he can do something worthy of her. He has a vision, he says. "There appeared to me a miraculous vision in which I saw things that made me resolve to say no more until I would be capable of writing about her in a more worthy fashion." Now, this is in 1295, as this book was being written. It's very doubtful that he had in mind then the Commedia, but in many ways it's hard not to see this as a preamble or a pre-Commedia, a way in which he has said, I am stopping here at this incomplete moment, and I will pick up with something more worthy, more deserving of my love for Beatrice. And that is exactly what we will find in the Commedia. We return next time to Canto 5, where we'll meet two of the most famous sinners in all of Dante's universe, Paolo and Francesca.